Hello and welcome to Nigeria, the Road to 2019, a series of programs where Arise News places the audience and the choice at the heart of our coverage of the upcoming presidential elections. I'm Charles Aniagolo. Coming up in the next 30 minutes or 60 minutes, all the news, comment and analysis that provide unrivaled insight into Nigeria 2019, including as a resurgent faction of Boko Haram has been reasserting itself militarily, the Nigerian Army has intensified its campaign against the militants. So what are the implications for security for the elections due in February? We speak to the director of the Nigerian Army's Public Relations Department, Brigadier General Sani Usman. And later, we'll assess the Trump administration's new strategy towards Africa outlined on Thursday. What foreign investment advantages might there be in it for whoever wins Nigeria's presidential election in 2019? Now, you may have heard recently about how a resurgent faction of Boko Haram that's affiliated with the Islamic State group has been reasserting itself militarily. Well, they are at it again. In the last few days, 5 more Nigerian soldiers have been reportedly killed in Borno State. That's in addition to the dozens of troops who've died there recently following militant attacks on several military bases, inflicting considerable damage on the army and police. And of course, you would have heard of the execution-style killings of hostages like Hawa Liman and Saifura Ahmed Kosa, 2 midwives who worked for the International Committee of the Red Cross. So naturally, many Nigerians are concerned about what they see as an increasingly aggressive Boko Haram, especially as the 2019 elections approach. The army, of course, under considerable political pressure, are launching major campaigns against the militants. And some observers fear that with both sides intensifying their battle, security around the election period could be severely tested. Well, to assess the current security situation in the northeast of Nigeria and the way this might play out around the elections, I was joined in the studio by the Director of Army Public Relations, Brigadier General Sani Usman, who is in effect the official spokesman of the Nigerian Army. Thank you very much indeed for talking to us, Brigadier General Sani Usman. Is this battle with Boko Haram likely to be won anytime soon? I mean, we've got elections coming up. Does that make you apprehensive that the attacks are going to intensify to try to disrupt those elections?
Not at all. We are not apprehensive. We are doing the best we can to ensure that we bring this war to a logical conclusion.
The problem is that your best does not appear to be good enough.
Well, to you, it might be so.
Well, the battle is still going on.
But the facts speak for itself in the sense that we're doing the best we could, and you need to look at it from the perspective of what was happening before and what is going on now. And definitely you will come to that conclusion. Definitely we're doing the best way we could to ensure that we succeed in dealing with the issue of terrorism and insurgency in this country, particularly in the northeastern part of the country. Remember, 3 or 4 years ago, there were areas that were, not habitable by anybody. In fact, to the point that the Boko Haram terrorists carved out a caliphate for themselves. But that has gone. And now they are on their own rather, than, carving out caliphate for themselves. And if you remember, the frequency of attacks has drastically reduced.
Actually, the contrary appears to be the case, because from all indications that there appears to have been an upsurge in violence generally in the northeast compared to, say, a year ago. I mean, since July, according to all the reports that we're getting, there have been nearly 20 attacks against military bases in the region, dozens of soldiers killed. So we're not talking about, I mean, that doesn't sound like an insurgency group that's on the run. Far from it. They are targeting and attacking military bases, the very, if you like, places they should be running away from if they were on the run.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I would like to tell you that precisely as of date, it's just 22, not just over 20. We are quite aware of that fact. And each of these attacks that you made mention of should be taken into the context under which it has occurred. You look at the magnitude and the number of casualties and what happened after such attacks. So this will inform your perspective of whether, you know, we are winning the war or not.
Yeah, but you're not telling us what is happening there. I mean, you're asking us to look at that, and I mean, what information do we have? We're asking you, you're the spokesman of the army, what is going on? The reports that we are getting suggest an upsurge in violence and direct attacks against military bases, the very bases that are supposed to be the defensive institutions in those areas.
In most cases, some of these reports, they are not always accurate. That's what I want you to understand. And I can give you an...
yeah, but you yourself talked about instances. More than 20
Yeah,
attacks.
exactly. It could be an ambush, it could be an IED. I hope you understand. Attack is an attack. But you look at the magnitude, like I told you earlier on, that will inform whether such thing is a serious issue or not compared to the picture others wanted to paint.
Well,
take for instance,
right
now we have issues of blowing things out of proportion, not getting accurate information about what happened. And take for instance the recent attack at Metele. You know, people came out with outrageous figures of casualty, when in reality we lost 23 soldiers, officers and soldiers, and 31 of them were wounded. But people were quoting figures despite the fact that we have evidence and we have told them the truth. And look at the reporting mechanism in the Nigerian Army. There is no basis whatsoever for anybody to lie about such important issue, about the life of someone, particularly that of a soldier who has sworn an oath to defend the territorial integrity of this country and sacrificing all he has, including his life, for the benefit of the Nigerian society. And somebody who has, in the course of duty, fallen, then you will go and hide such information. It's uncalled for. And these are the kind of thing that makes people tend to believe. And that is why we are trying to make people understand that, look, we are forthcoming and we are forthright when it comes to information bearing security or concern about such issues. So people should believe us, people should support us, people should understand the circumstances under which we operate. And I can rest assure you, all this apprehension will not be there. And again, what fuels such things is the fact that there are some vested interests. For whatever reason, they don't tend to support what the troops are doing. They would rather see you know, the troops being disgraced. And to a large extent, such attitude doesn't go well with the fight against terrorism and insurgency. It is not the Nigerian Army or the Nigerian military versus the terrorists. It is the country itself. Therefore, everybody has to support this effort. Attitude to a large extent will, to some extent, also assist and, you know, give the true sense of belonging. But a situation whereby your best is always not good enough for somebody who does not even take time to find out the true situation is always demoralizing. And remember again the impact of fake news nowadays. I've just read in one of the papers, somebody was telling us that we just secretly buried, you know, 100 soldiers. But he couldn't say which cemetery, when, and how. And it is not true.
Well, the problem, Brigadier General Sani Usman, is that historically the Nigerian Army tries to downplay, and it's not just unique to the Nigerian Army, it's also the other armies operating within the Lake Chad region. They've tried as much as possible to downplay the facts, especially when casualties are involved. You don't want to look like you're being defeated. So oftentimes, and that's a fact, and some of your own soldiers have admitted that to journalists who've spoken to them, you don't want it to look like you're being defeated. So you tell us that 3 soldiers were killed, but then we get onto the phone, speak to locals, speak to people, even speak to your own rank and file troops, and they say dozens were killed. But of course, all that can't be independently verified, because you have declared those places to be no-go areas because they're supposed to be theaters of war. So how on earth are we supposed to our job is to independently verify what you said, not to simply accept what you said, because oftentimes that doesn't tally with other reports coming out of the area.
Well, first and foremost, I would like to tell you we have always been forthright with information, especially as regards to what happened to our troops. If we lose or if we win, we have always been doing that. Well, and now if you want to look at it from that perspective also, I would have asked you, how do you verify that source of information? The fact that somebody at the order,
because you have said that we can't go there. They're theaters of war.
I'm coming, sir. The fact that somebody called you and said that he's XYZ when you don't have any means of verification. And we have had instances where people pretended to be soldiers when in real sense of the word, they are not. And secondly, I want you to give me an instance where, particularly you say West Africa, I don't speak for the West African troops, per se, I speak for the Nigerian Army. And to the best of my knowledge, we have always been forthright in, disclosing what happened to our troops. And the bottom line for this is that we are doing the work or the fight against terrorism and insurgency on behalf of the Nigerian society. So the Nigerians whom we are fighting on their behalf for need to know. And an enlightened society is better than a society that is not enlightened.
Right, you talked about an example. Let's talk about that village of Matele, for example. The independent information emerging from there said that at least 40 soldiers were killed.
That is not correct.
You say 32.
No, I did not say 32, I said 23.
Okay, 23. Yeah. You said 23. So the bottom line is there is a disparity between your account and the other accounts that are coming out of there. Now, if journalists had the opportunity to visit those places and to verify independently, talk to the locals, get a sense of what is going on, then perhaps we'd have a better idea of what is going on. But nevertheless, what are you actually doing to apprehend the people who committed those atrocities there?
Well, as you know, the fight against terrorism and insurgency is an ongoing thing. And at this point, it is not appropriate for me to disclose our strategies or what we are doing. But I can rest assure you, our troops are busy doing what they are supposed to do in terms of, the fight.
Right, but do you admit
specifically,
that there's been an upsurge in violence? Because that led the president himself to travel to Maiduguri to go and oversee some sort of a review of security arrangements to take into account this new threat.
Naturally, the president is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of the Federal Republic of
Well, it's not every day he goes to Maiduguri, so there's a reason why he went.
It's not every day you have the privilege of having the commander-in-chief in your midst. So he reserves the right to be wherever he so wishes. And we were so happy for his esteemed presence during the annual conference of the Chief of Army Staff, in which not only he addressed the hierarchy of the army, he also addressed some of the troops fighting terror.
And then convened an emergency meeting.
And also visited those operating in the hospital.
Right.
And I don't want to disclose what Mr. President has said to the officers and to the soldiers. But for the soldiers, actually, it was an open secret because he addressed them publicly. And of course, those who were convalescing in the hospital, he talked to them and gave them talks that encourage and give them sense of belonging, and we are quite grateful about that. But a lot of people, they tend to take things out of context. We have always been enjoying the support of Mr. President, and he has always been given the strategic direction. So it is not out of place if he goes to the theater.
Well, let me ask you this. Is there a new threat in the Northeast? Because we're hearing of groups like ISWA, the Islamic State for West Africa and so on, which appears to have been emboldened in their attacks against you. They've also got, according to what we understand, you can confirm or deny that, foreign fighters, some of the people who fought in places like Syria and Iraq and so on. And we know of the global threat posed by Islamic states. These are battle-hardened fighters who are now coming to places like the Northeast and other parts of West Africa. Can you confirm that they have become a renewed threat in the fight against insurgency in West Africa in general and Nigeria in particular?
What I'm trying to tell you is that...
Well, I asked you a question.
Yeah. Threats kept on evolving.
Yeah, but is ISWA a threat to you? Is it a new threat in addition to the other threats?
Well, possibly you have to look at the issue of ISWA as it is. ISWA is just a nomenclature for the terrorists that go by the name Boko Haram terrorist group because they have an affiliation with the Islamic states.
And that affiliation is leading to greater support for them.
And remember, the composition of Boko Haram terrorists is not just Nigerian citizens alone. The Lake Chad region has members, just like we have the multinational joint task force fighting the terrorists, so it is with the membership of the Boko Haram terrorists.
Brigadier
so what I'm trying to tell you is that, yes, new threats kept on evolving, and we keep on strategizing as the threats evolve. And I want to assure you that the Nigerian soldier has been fighting them to the point we are.
We understand
and we have the records.
Yeah,
we have the records.
Does this new threat,
since the First and the Second World War, to the point of peacekeeping operations, up to the moment we are talking now about the fight against terrorism and insurgency, that we have always been doing our best. We have known the world over for being courageous and brave. So regardless of the evolving threats, we will definitely get over those things.
Does this new threat explain the upsurge in attacks against the army?
Naturally, nobody wants to be attacked.
No, that's not the question.
Good. So what I want you to understand...
Does the new threat explain the upsurge in attacks against the army?
It is not upsurge. It's something that we have been experiencing over time. There were instances, one attack, maybe in a month, could be so devastating, more than 20 attacks within a period of time. I hope you understand. So you look at it from that perspective. And what I'm trying to tell you is that, yes, we envisage this kind of tactics and we are dealing with it. I can rest assure you, give us some time, you will see the difference.
Okay, well, let me ask you something else. You talked about, and you talked commendably about the soldiers who are giving their lives and the fact that, the Nigerian people should support the army in that quest, because in agreeing with you, it's not easy for somebody to go and sacrifice their lives on behalf of a country, but in many cases they want to be appreciated. But does the army actually appreciate those people? Because they are the people who work with you and for you. Why is it that you don't celebrate and commemorate the lives of soldiers killed in combat, in defense of this nation? We never see them draped, their coffins draped in national colors, celebrated as heroes. If you look at the United States of America, one soldier killed, the president would turn up to celebrate and commemorate the life of that person. The names of these soldiers are never mentioned in public. They're simply, it sounds like they're simply forgotten. Why is that?
That is not correct. What I want you to understand, like in the Nigerian Army, we have our own procedures, custom and traditions. Whenever we encounter casualties like this, there are procedures in terms of payment of entitlement, decent burial, and what have you. But what I want you to understand, rather you should have put this question to the Nigerian society. Why is it that an average soldier is not so well appreciated?
No, it's not like the Nigerian society.
Like other clients.
No.
But
I'm asking you, why is it that if you want to bring the Nigerian, these people, these soldiers, their families are part of Nigerian society.
You are talking. You are talking as if I myself am coming from the moon. When you are talking about these soldiers, I'm part.
I didn't say you were coming from the moon.
What I'm trying to make you understand is that I am part and parcel of the Nigerian soldier. So what is happening to any one of those soldiers could have happened to me. And I know that the Nigerian Army really appreciate, encourage, support, and celebrate the Nigerian soldier. And when it comes to burial, there were instances where some of these soldiers were even buried at the National Cemetery in Abuja. Whereas we have a policy, given the exigencies of the fight against terrorism and insurgency, we have decent cemeteries, particularly in Memalari Cantonment in Maiduguri. And whenever we sustain casualty, there is a procedure which family members are informed, and if time for burial comes, we always invite the family members, and the procedures are followed. Draped in national color, prayers are being said, and all those that have lost their lives, they are being commemorated. We have just established a new edifice in their honor in Gudumbali also. And if you can look at my chest here, this is part of commemorating the sacrifices of the Nigerian soldier over time, and much more.
Let's talk about another potential threat that could be coming your way, because what we know of the origins, the provenance of the Boko Haram insurgency started when their leader was jailed and all the issues around that, and he eventually died in custody, and that raised the levels of militancy. There's another movement in Nigeria called the Islamic Movement of Nigeria. We had them here just a couple of weeks ago. They were very concerned about what is happening with they alleged that their members were being treated very heavy-handedly. Their leader was in jail, had been in jail in spite of court orders. Many of their members killed, and the level of militancy in their ranks growing. I mean, there are fears amongst the Nigerian populace who don't really know or understand these things that the group could turn increasingly violent and present a threat to security in Nigeria, especially the militant way they've been talking, saying that their people are being killed, they will never forgive, they must exact revenge. Elections around the corner, their leader and many supporters in jail in spite of court orders to the contrary. Are those fears that they could become increasingly more militant justified?
Well, what I want you to understand, the Islamic movement of Nigeria, you need to go back and critically examine them. They have always been militant. So it is not true for anybody to say they just evolve.
Well, they said they don't carry arms.
Well, that is what they said.
When they demonstrate in Abuja, we've seen them. They don't carry weapons.
Possibly you are new to it. I would like you to go back just recently, you know, to 2015, particularly on the 12th December 2015. Find out what happened. Find out what happened. And in most instances, the military or the security agencies never go after them. They were the ones that were after the security agencies. I hope you understand.
I don't know.
So
what
beyond
you
that,
their
again,
leader was jailed.
Well, you should understand that you're talking to the spokesman of the Nigerian Army. Nigeria is a federation, is a country that has a government, a up and doing judicial system. So this question is not even meant for the Nigerian Army. But what I want you to understand, is that simply because somebody came to you and tell you things might not necessarily be correct.
So that's why we're asking you.
That's
why we're asking you to balance it. We hear from them, we hear from you.
What I'm trying to say, it is not IMN versus Nigerian Army. It is IMN versus Nigerian state. In most cases, in fact, in Kaduna State, they have been banned because of their activities. And we have other security agencies to deal with internal security issues.
Do you think the army and the government made an error in the way that they've reached out to the Islamic movement of Nigeria, and that in a sense they've incited the movement along a more dangerous, less conciliatory path?
What I want you to understand, please, can you go back to history, just recent history? go back to what happened in December 2015, which seems to have escalated the conflicts. You need to go back and look at it from that perspective. And I know that there were efforts to make them serious and understand the need for peaceful coexistence and respect for all the components of groups of the Nigerian society.
Was there an incident where the army opened fire on their members and killed many of them?
I want you to go back and look at it.
No, you're saying go back. You're the army spokesman. I'm asking you a question.
You need to go back and understand the circumstances under which there were confrontations between Islamic movement and Nigeria.
And what were
and
the
Nigerian Army.
circumstances?
You look at it.
No, I'm asking you. You're here now. You're the army spokesman.
What
What
to look at what happened in 2015.
Yeah, but what were the circumstances
Possibly you need to
that
go back
led
and look
to
at
the
it,
army
particularly on the
opening
truck.
fire on them?
And recently, I know there was an incident involving the military and the Islamic movement in Zuba, where a convoy of the Nigerian Army conveying arms and ammunition were stopped. It would take special grace of God because those missiles did not explode.
Right. Now, President Buhari, of course, said 3 years ago, or 3.5 years ago, that the battle against Boko Haram had basically been won. Are we right to dispute that rhetoric now?
It is not rhetoric. It is not rhetoric. It is the absolute truth.
That you've won the battle against Boko Haram. So why are you still fighting Boko Haram?
Listen, and I will tell you why. I will tell you why. What was the aim of Boko Haram? Is to establish an Islamic state. Have they established Islamic state? You know, the answer is capital no. Initially, yes, they carve out a caliphate for themselves. Changing Goda as Madinatul Islam as their capital. But is the capital still there? Or do they control any territory in this country? The answer is no. Therefore, you have won the battle.
Right. The fact.
And go back and check all those countries that have experienced insurgency the world over. It took Colombia over 50 years. And of course, the United States is still battling in Afghanistan. I can cite several instances. And what happened in Nigeria is most unprecedented. An order was given, and before December 2016, yeah, we are able to achieve our aim.
Yeah, but the United States are not
what is
saying,
happening, and let me
they're
tell
not
you,
saying they've won the battle.
Let me tell you,
yeah.
The fight against terrorism and insurgency in Nigeria is hinged on three things. First, to defeat the Boko Haram terrorists, which we have done, make room or way for humanitarian activities, which is ongoing, and restoration of law and order so that governance will take place. And it's taking place to the point now in Maiduguri, where there was nobody before. Now we have an NGO that is taking up an apartment, rented an apartment for upward of 10 years. And you can go to Maiduguri today.
I have been to Maiduguri.
I know it takes.
I've been to Maiduguri.
I know
been to
you.
Yobe
You
State,
pay through your nose to get
those places.
hotel accommodation now, isn't it?
I suppose.
But 3 years ago, it wasn't so.
Brigadier General Sani Usman, I suppose the wider question is, can military force actually win the war and end the conflict with Boko Haram? Or will it be, as we've seen in many places, some of the places you've mentioned where there have been insurgencies, like Northern Ireland, Latin America, is it going to be a political solution?
Good question. You talked about ending conflicts, you talked about winning the war. And at the beginning, I told you that the fight against terrorism and insurgency is not the prerogative of the military or the Nigerian Army alone. It's a collective responsibility. The military is doing the best it could. There are other things that need to be done by the Nigerian society. And I believe the government is leading. And we are pleading with other components of Nigerian society to see the fight as such. every person has a positive role to play so that the conflict could be brought to an end.
So do you believe that the only way to bring it to an end is through a political solution?
I did not say so. The Nigerian society has to see the war, take ownership of the war against terrorism and insurgency. It's a collective responsibility.
So what's your final message to people who are watching this program?
I want to thank them for keeping the faith with the Nigerian military, particularly the Nigerian Army, and I want to implore them to continue to support and understand with us, and be rest assured the Nigerian military will do them proud by totally decimating the Boko Haram terrorists so that we have peace and there will be development in this country.
Brigadier General Sani Usman, Director, Army Public Relations, and in effect, the spokesman of the Nigerian Army, thank you very much indeed.
It is my pleasure, sir. Thank you so much.
And that was, of course, Brigadier General Sani Usman, a spokesman for the Nigerian Army, talking to me earlier. You're watching Nigeria, the road to 2019. Plenty more still ahead, including we assess the Trump administration's new strategy towards Africa outlined on Thursday. And we ask, what foreign investment advantages might there be in it for whoever wins Nigeria's presidential election in 2019? Stay with us.
Thinking of banking in Africa? Think Zenith. In today's fast-moving, fast-changing world, you need a financial partner that understands your unique expectations. A bank with presence in major financial centers across the world, with the enabling platform to facilitate seamlessly, whenever, wherever, however. A bank with best-in-class financial solutions from a superb combination of technology and human touch. For easy, fast and secure banking that creates real value. Turning dreams into reality is now in your hands. People, technology, service. Zenith Bank, in your best interest.
As a fashion writer, I know how quickly trends are created and changed. In business, it's no different. To stay ahead, I needed a plan flexible enough to meet my changing communication needs. More Business 2.0 didn't just give me voice and data in one package. I got a whole lot more. With More Business, setting up my website was no problem. But I'm not just a fashion writer. I also own a home decor store before I decided to open an accessory store. With my customized More Business plan, managing my staff's communication is easy. No matter how frequently they come, oh, they go. With 9mobile's new online self-service this week, I could adapt my plans to include this.
From 2,000 Naira, choose a business bundle, customize your staff's voice and data lines, and enjoy a variety of add-on business services. Dial *200 *5# now to subscribe. More Business.
Welcome back to Nigeria, the road to 2019. I'm Charles Onyegolu. Now, as you may have heard on Arise News, the United States government has been outlining its new policy towards Africa. In a speech in Washington, the U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton said the Trump administration will focus on stronger trade ties and countering terrorism on the continent. Mr. Bolton also roundly criticized current Russian and Chinese activities in Africa, which he described as opaque and corrupt. He added that the two nations were deliberately and aggressively attempting to gain an economic advantage over the United States on the continent. Let's take a listen to some of what he said.
The United States will no longer provide indiscriminate assistance across the entire continent without focus or prioritization. And we will no longer support unproductive, unsuccessful, and unaccountable UN peacekeeping missions. We want something more to show for Americans' hard-earned taxpayer dollars. Under our new Africa strategy, we will target U.S. funding toward key countries and particular strategic objectives. All U.S. aid on the continent will advance U.S. interest and help African nations move toward self-reliance. China uses bribes, opaque agreements, and the strategic use of debt to hold states in Africa captive to Beijing's wishes and demands. Its investment ventures are riddled with corruption and do not meet the same environmental or ethical standards as U.S. developmental programs. Such predatory actions are subcomponents of broader Chinese strategic initiatives, including One Belt, One Road, a plan to develop a series of trade routes leading to and from China, with the ultimate goal of advancing Chinese global dominance. Russia, for its part, is also seeking to increase its influence in the region through corrupt economic dealings. Across the continent, Russia advances its political and economic relationships with little regard to the rule of law or accountable and transparent governance. It continues to sell arms and energy in exchange for votes at the United Nations, votes that keep strong men in power, undermine peace and security, and run counter to the best interest of the African people. Russia also continues to extract natural resources from the region for its own benefit. To expand our economic relationships in the region, we are developing a new initiative called Prosper Africa, which will support U.S. investment across the continent, grow Africa's middle class, and improve the overall business climate in the region. In addition, we will encourage African leaders to choose high-quality, transparent, inclusive, and sustainable foreign investment projects, including those from the United States.
The U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton there setting out America's new strategy and policy towards Africa. So what might all this mean for whoever wins Nigeria's presidential election in February? Could there be the opportunity to attract new American money into Nigeria, something that would boost the early term of whoever gets the mantle of leadership in 2019 in terms of job creation and better infrastructure? Well, for more on this, let's speak now to the international economist and London-based business analyst, who's also something of an expert on US-Africa relations, Christian Udechukwu. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. I know you had a busy day today, so we appreciate your being here. How curious is it, first of all, that the Trump administration's Africa policy and strategy is coming from the U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton? I mean, how much does that speak to the fact that this new strategy is all anchored around America's national security interest on the continent?
Well, Charles, it's very significant indeed, because normally all previous Pan-African strategy focused on U.S.-Africa relationship development has always come from the U.S. president, whether it was Bill Clinton announcing his $100 billion Africa fund, or whether it was George Bush announcing his, President Bush announcing Power Africa project for $100 billion, and so on. Today we have John Bolton making the announcement, not the U.S. Secretary of State, not the president himself. I think it's, I don't want to read much into it, but it doesn't prioritize Africa as far as the U.S. relations, global geopolitics is concerned. The fund is considerably lower than most regimes in America has announced. This is a $60 billion fund. Albeit perhaps it's possible that Congress may review it at some point going forward. We're almost midway into the Trump administration, so perhaps there may be an opportunity for a review. But the first thing to do is to welcome U.S. engagement in Africa, because it's like they're there, but they're not there. So we welcome their engagement, and then also we also take note of something that most likely some people will miss, which is the fact that U.S. will no longer significantly send its military into Africa on peacekeeping missions. That is a very significant message, because it means that most African countries that tend to jump into conflict at the drop of a hat may have to think very carefully about starting crisis with the intention that there might be foreign intervention and presence on the ground. So that's a very significant development that will compel people to think twice about starting new violence. The third thing to notice in the speech by John Bolton, of course, is the the emphasis on Russia and China, and not as much time devoted to African countries themselves.
Yeah, yes.
You know,
That's a very good point, because that was
yeah.
going to be my next question. I mean, he spent a lot of time attacking what he called corrupt and predatory practices by Russia and China on the continent. So he was essentially talking on the one hand of developing and prioritizing the economy in Africa, including opportunities for African businesses, but also somehow presenting the US, and it will be interesting to get your interpretation here, presenting the US as protecting the interests of African countries in contrast to what he said Beijing and Moscow were doing.
Well, I think the jury is out there, and that assertion is really up in the air in terms of U.S. assuming or presuming strategic protective umbrella over Africa, needing to protect Africa from other predators like China and Russia, as he describes it. I think most Africans significantly welcome China's engagement into Africa. It was refreshing, given more than 100 years of perhaps strategic engagement with the West and alliance, and not having very much to show for it. Most African countries now have power structures, bridges, road infrastructure, urban transportation networks, and so on that they didn't have before. Because the West had the approach which has kept Africa partly underdeveloped for more than 60 years, to say, oh, you have to combat poverty, you have to combat corruption, you have to comply with human rights and so on, before we can build this bridge, before we can build this hospital, before we can build this healthcare center.
There's always a big stick.
Well, there's always a big stick. But I think that the Chinese came with a different approach because it has worked for them. They've come from a position of extreme dictatorship to creating an amazingly prosperous and wealthy society. They create more billionaires in China than America does in a year. So they understand how wealth is created now. And I see that that is part of the model that they're developing in Africa. It's a strategic partnership which the West and the Americans will do very well to emulate. Because we've seen situations, China has a $900 billion budget for building infrastructure, creating relationships across the world. Now, America has devoted $60 billion to Africa. I don't know how much impact that will make.
Yeah, but that's pretty much the same amounts that China voted for Africa at the last China-Africa summit. It was about $60 billion. I mean, what I wanted to ask you about was that, I mean, Mr. Bolton also made a sort of offer there, which you've touched on, saying the US would focus on trade as well as countering terrorism. I mean, would that be an attractive prospect for African countries, or would it be seen as the US using the opportunity or the excuse to gain military advantage over China and Russia on the continent?
Well, I think the great way to look at this is to say that U.S. engagement with Africa now offers African countries greater variety. It means that there are more partners, global partners that have real big resources on the table that they can engage with. The challenge, as you averred in the opening remark, is that we need to ask ourselves here in Africa whether African countries and African leaders and the people are prepared to engage proactively and positively with Russia, China, and America. Because the truth is, Africans can't choose who to deal with. They choose who serves their best interests. And they can work with all the partners because collectively they get the best out of the world.
Nevertheless, it sounds like the makings of a new scramble for Africa, sort of repackaging and if you like, branded under the trade model, because at the end of it, I mean, how many Africans can actually get to benefit in jobs, in infrastructure, in all of the other things that are necessary to live a prosperous life and to stem the tide of sort of the immigration that we're seeing to places like Europe and so on?
Well, first of all, I can't see any African country dealing with America to the exclusion of the others. It just wouldn't work. That's one. Number two is that it is the responsibility of the home governments of many African countries to sit back and draw up a strategy for engagement with China, with Russia, and with the United States. Okay, if America says it has $60 billion for Africa, Nigeria is probably the largest economy in Africa, the most populous nation, the biggest market. So what you would expect the Nigerian government to do, regardless of the government that is in power and its political affiliation, what you would expect the Nigerian government to do is to sit back and ask itself, this $60 billion that America has just put on the table, and the $60 billion that China has, to the exclusion of the $900 billion that they have for the One Belt, One Road project. They have 60 for Africa, 900 for the world, and they can still tap into that. And the money from Russia and the money from India, don't forget that, and from Japan as well. So to say, okay, so what do we need? How many hospitals do we need in Nigeria? How many of that can America build from this 60 billion? How much transportation networks do we need? How many bridges do we need to build? How many kilometers of road do we need? How much upgrade do our educational institutions need? How much technology do we need to acquire? How much of that can we buy from the 60 billion? They need to draw up a big shopping list and then engage with the Americans on it. Because take the Power Africa project, for example. Bush had 100 billion, Obama inherited it. And what we got in that 16 years were just men dressing up in fancy suits and flying into five-star hotels, including the Hilton here, and having mega conferences without any real project taking off. I mean, it's not for the absence of power projects in Nigeria that require funding. It's the lack of follow-through. The big money announcement at conferences are huge. I mean, I'm a conference convener, so I understand that. But the follow-through, these persistence on nuanced change, which must pervade the society before the funds can come through, just doesn't work. And I think the Chinese all understand that if a man has learned to fish and can feed himself and his family, you can then moderate how often he goes to fish. As opposed to saying, oh, we will never teach you how to fish until you learn to be more respectful, until you learn to be, more courteous, more polite, and you vote for us at international forums and all that, and you vote the way we want, not the way you want to, and so on. So that is the problem that I see America and the West having. But if they adopt the China approach, because a lot of Africans are increasingly averse to dictatorial tendencies or to dictations and impositions from overseas. If the engagement is conciliatory and respectful based on equality and fairness, then I see the Prosper Africa strategy from Bolton and the US government working. If the African governments have a priority list or a list of strategy for engagement across the countries, across the regions, because you need the country strategies that come from a country like Nigeria, then you need the regional strategies that come from ECOWAS, because there is the common market and so on that needs to be looked at on a long-term basis, then we might be able to get the best out of them. I mean, by them, I mean by get the best out of America.
Right. Well, let's try and make this directly relevant now to the elections that are coming up in Nigeria. It's been talked about as a potential lifeline, if you like, for whoever wins the election in 2019, because technically it could mean that there's going to be a new influx. I mean, I don't know how long it's going to take for this money to start to trickle in, but it could mean that it gives the person greater opportunity in terms of creating jobs, building infrastructure, and having a wider selection of countries to choose from or to bring into Nigeria, because here are the Americans saying, hey, we're going to do this. I mean, from that point of view, how much of an advantage might it offer, foreign investment advantage, to whoever wins the 2019 election?
Well, the first big thing, that's a very significant question, Charles. The first big thing is that it sends a positive signal. The positive signal it sends to global investors and private capital is, okay, guys, American funds can flow into Africa now. We're happy to engage. So that's the first official policy signal that it's okay to invest in Africa now. And therefore, most American companies that are looking for opportunities in Africa or have never thought of investing in Africa might be asking themselves questions to say, if we keyed into this US government policy, perhaps we might get US Exim underwriting our risks and ensuring that we're not exposed. But then we're creating new markets and creating new jobs in America and so on. So there's that opportunity there. And what it does really for the new government in Nigeria, potentially, whether it's continuity of the current regime or change of a new to a new regime, is that it presents them with an option. But as I say, you cannot benefit from a lottery for which you don't have a ticket. You have to have a plan for engaging with America. And then you need to have a priority shopping list. And also, having announced this policy, it will take perhaps anywhere between 12 to 18 months, 24 months for the policy structure and the funds flow structure and the command and control structures that will support it to be firmly established. Whether they will go through established institutions like USAID, ODA, and co. I mean, OPIC, we don't know. But all that needs to be clarified. But then on the Nigerian side, one quick diversion might just be like when Theresa May, the UK Prime Minister, was in Nigeria, announcing that the UK had about 60 billion pounds for trade and investment development with Africa. I thought we should also have said, okay, you know, we have some shopping list of what we need from the United Kingdom. So having such high-level engagements, having clarity on what you want, and beginning the dialogue early. Most governments get into trouble because they come in and they believe this is the first year. But what you don't do in the first year, you lose 2 years.
So is it your sense then that it's quite possible that this opportunity might slip through the fingers of many Nigerians prospective? Because I mean, I am agreeing with you in the sense that if somebody was really watching this very keenly and was really up on what was going on, you'd have them scribbling furiously, and they may well be doing that, but saying, well, look, this is an opportunity, let's try and engage the Americans right away, get some further clarity on what we might expect from them, and incorporate it into our manifesto as we go into the campaign.
Correct, yes. As a matter of fact, yes, because part of what happens in elections is that when a candidate is promising, oh, I will build 100 new primary schools, 200 new secondary schools, and 5,000 new universities. The normal question from the opposition is, so how the hell are you going to fund this, right? So you have to have an internal generated revenue plan, sales exports plan, and so on, international funding, borrowing, a mixture of a variety of funding sources to support your plan. So yes, this announcement comes at a very strategic time that allows the contesting political parties and government to think big and to actually think what they can do for Nigeria. As in business, there's nothing wrong with having a big plan that most people would think was a pie in the sky. The problem is not having a plan at all. Because if you have a plan, you can always modify it when things and variables change. What we have seen significantly over many years is that the planning has not been as foresighted as it should be. It's always fallen short of what would have been necessary to move Nigeria to where it should be.
Chris, I want to thank you very much indeed. Christian Udechukwu is, of course, the international economist, London-based business analyst and expert on US-Africa relations. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Charles, for having me.
Well, that's it for this edition of Nigeria, the Road to 2019. Join us again for a fresh edition tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja, bye-bye, and thank you for watching.
like a barracuda. Destiny, what did you used to be? A mask on the machine tour. Missing step, and putting step. Fantasy, hot and hungry tease. A stigma in every direction. Kept him light and forced to fight. I stalked the night like a barracuda. So fresh and clean, incandescent dream. Lipstick, brandy, and eye sheen. What does it mean? Rainbow gasoline. Sometimes I really like it. Kept him light and forced to fight. Was secretly faithful to pleasure. Hungry nights in neon nights, and just a rainbow of day glow flavors. I know it's funny paradise. The truth is hidden in the picture. This is why we see light. Still on that direction. So fresh and clean, incandescent dream. Lipstick,